Welcome to the Buffalo Olmsted Parks Conservancy walking tour of Hoyt Lake and Ure Delaware Park. This is presented by M&T Bank, and I'm Jim Mendola, the volunteer historian for the Olmsted Parks. To start, I think I'll give you some background on the three people who are most influential in creating these parks. It would be Frederick Law Olmsted, of course, Calvert Vaux, his partner, and the man that got him involved with landscape architecture, and William Dorsheimer, a Buffalo millionaire who was instrumental in bringing Olmsted to Buffalo. Now, Frederick Law Olmsted was born in 1822 in Hartford, Connecticut, to a prosperous merchant and a rather indulgent father. At the age of 4, his mother died, and his father then took over his care and would ride with him in the country, just put him on a saddle and go and explore outside of Hartford. By the time he was 14, he was exploring on his own and unfortunately went into a patch of poison sumac, which affected his eyes. But it was rather fortunate for us because he was on track to go to Yale Divinity School, and this sidetracked him and probably saved his career as a landscape architect. It took him about a year and a half to recover his sight, but he actually was sort of fooling around and exploring the countryside for about 3 years. And even his father finally got fed up with him just lollygagging around and arranged for him to have a clerkship in New York City at a merchant that he knew. Well, Olmsted wasn't very happy with that, just didn't work out well. So he took a radical change and signed up for a China trade ship to go back and forth to China as an ordinary sailor. It took about a year to go back and forth, and it nearly killed him. By the time he got back, he was sort of a skeleton and jaundiced. It took him about a year to recover from that trip at his father's home in Hartford. But it did give him a chance to bunk with common folk and kind of get an idea of their problems, and this would influence him later on. By the 1840s, when he recovered from his trips to China, friends of his got him interested in scientific farming. He apprenticed to an advocate of the technique, which involved different plowing, rotating crops, and use of fertilizer, which was unusual for the time. Having spent a year and a half apprenticing to this farmer, his father supported him in getting a 125-acre farm on Staten Island. Now, he had a couple of successful years there, but then heard that England was the best place to go to find out about scientific farming techniques. So he went to England, landed in Liverpool, and one of the seminal effects of his future was there. It was Birkenhead Park. Now, that was the first publicly financed and publicly open park in the world. He was very impressed by the mixture of people that were there, poor and lords and just middle class. So this made an impression on him. He went and visited many of the farms in England and learned some of the techniques that he would use in the parks later, specifically how to drain land. And this came in very handy, especially in Delaware Park, where it was a swampy area when he first came here. When he got back, he published a book, Walks and Talks of an American Farmer in England. It became quite popular, and this gave him entry into the literary circles in New York City. And they started giving him commissions to write for some of the horticultural magazines. He eventually sort of lost interest in farming because of his connections with literature in New York City, and moved to New York, where he met as part of the circle of these influential horticultural people, Calvert Vaux. He would become his partner in creating the Buffalo Parks. But at this time, he asked Olmsted to join him in submitting a plan for a contest to build a park, a central park in New York City. In 1858, they both submitted the plan and won the competition. Olmsted and Vaux started building the park. which had been just sort of a swampy squatters area in New York City, with Vaux taking charge of the buildings in Central Park because he was one of the few trained architects in America, whereas Olmsted took charge of molding the land into the park. By 1860, the Civil War started up. All work on Central Park stopped. And Olmsted was put in charge of the Sanitary Commission. He actually reformed the way that bivouacs were laid out, how hospitals were laid out, and reformed the supply route to the troops. He also reformed the way that the wounded were evacuated from the battlefields. While it wasn't perfect and many wounded were still stranded on the battlefield, it was a start. On a personal note, 53 years ago, I was a combat medic, and while I didn't know it at the time, the evacuation techniques that we use to get the wounded out of the battlefield are a direct evolution of Olmsted's initial plans. It's estimated that he probably saved tens of thousands of lives with his techniques, especially in the areas of disease prevention, because 2 out of 3 fatalities in the Civil War were from disease. After the Civil War ended, they resumed work on Central Park and finished that in about 1867-68. And this is where William Dorsheimer, the Buffalo civic-minded millionaire, comes into play. He was Attorney General of New York, Lieutenant Governor of New York, and served 1 term in Congress. So he was back and forth to New York City quite a bit and was very impressed by Olmsted's work on Central Park, and thought that it would be good to have him come and see if we could do a Central Park in Buffalo. So he contacted him, and in August '68, while he was on his way to Chicago to build Riverside Park, propose it, he stopped at the train station in Buffalo and spent some time touring Buffalo to see what park locations were possible. And then on his return trip in August, he met with city fathers at J.J. Jewett's house on Delaware Avenue and proposed 3 parks for Buffalo, connected by parkways. Now, this would be unique in the world, and the city fathers were pretty excited about it and gave their initial approval for these plans.